Shalom Chavarim, this is Richard Solomon, and this will be an example of a legacy video recording that you can make for your students, your children, your grandchildren. All right. So today is December 30th, 2014. And as I said, this is Richard Solomon. And I was born on October 6th, 1943, which makes me a little over 71 years young. Now, there are many questions that my family has posed to me, and I'm going to simply answer two questions of the many questions they have asked me to respond to. The two questions I'm going to answer are, what was life living in Brooklyn? And secondly, why did you become a teacher? All right, so let's start with the first question. What was life like living in Brooklyn? And by the way, I'm looking at my notes down here, so that would explain why I'm looking down. And I should also say, when you make these video recordings for your children or grandchildren, you don't have to be perfect. You could be just who you are, and they get to see how you relate and emote. So with regard to the first question, what was life like in Brooklyn? Well, back in 1943 and much of my childhood years, life in Brooklyn was fantastic. We had playgrounds, we played ball on the sidewalk, we played ball in the streets and in the schoolyard and in parks. It was just basically a wonderful time, and we had no way of determining if we lived in a rich neighborhood or a poor neighborhood. That's simply where I lived. So where did I first live? I first lived in Bedford-Stuyvesant section of Brooklyn. We didn't know it was a poor section at the time. Then we lived in Crown Heights, and later on my parents moved us to Sheepshead Bay. So what was life like in Bed-Stuy and in a not such nice area called St. John's Place? You could check it. I lived for the first 7 years of my life in 1156 St. John's Place. Okay? Well, as I said, it was a really fun place to live. We didn't think we were poor. In fact, we thought we were rich because the poor people actually lived on the street. They were drunkards, and at night, when it would get cold, they would live down in the cellar, which is where the coal trucks placed the coal into the furnace. So I thought we were doing fine. Now, I didn't know that it was strange to go to school with the members of your block or in your community. We were not a gang. We were just a group of kids who all went to school together. Why did we go to school together? Because we didn't want to be attacked by any other gangs or kids from other blocks while we were off to school. And at one time I remember so vividly now is I was coming home from school. I was then attending PS 167 in Brooklyn. And a group of people from another block jumped me and hurt me. And I obviously decided I'll never do that again, go home alone. But they did attack me, and I ran away from them, ran as fast as I possibly could. And believe it or not, I jumped into a tin garbage can, put the lid on top, when the kids from the other block went past me, I got out of the garbage can and came home and smelt terribly. My mother at the time was wondering why did I smell so badly, and I said, well, we just were playing around. I never actually told her about the gang. But I do recall that shortly thereafter, it seemed to me that we moved to a nicer neighborhood in Crown Heights. There was a degree of anti-Semitism, which we knew from kids from other blocks who were of different ethnicities, but that was part of the situation. Now, as a child, I always lived in an apartment. The first time I ever lived in a home that I owned was when Mom and I bought a home in Columbia, Maryland. But as I said earlier, life was sweet. It was so much fun. I had friends. I had an opportunity to play ball. I went to school and did all right in school. And life was terrific. Now, what the special part about my life as a child was what we did in the summer. Instead of playing on the streets, we actually would play in the streets in Brooklyn, punch ball, stick ball, etc. Where the cars would come, we would actually play there. Of course, there were schoolyards, etc. In the summer, my parents took us to the country. Right after school ended, around June 30th, we'd spend 8 weeks in Monticello at different bungalow colonies. Boy, was this great. I thought life was magnificent. We had handball courts, basketball courts, swimming pool. There was a camp there. And my dad would drive up from New York on Thursday afternoon or Friday afternoon, spend several hours on the road, and would come up and spend weekends with us, and then get up early Monday or Tuesday morning and return back to work at his place where he sold cashmere sweaters. Indeed, my dad was a great hero for me because he did so much to help us. So, if you were to ask what life in Brooklyn was, I would say that it was a wonderful life. One of the things I should also mention about life in Brooklyn is that we were very insulated, meaning my grandparents, my cousins, my aunts, my uncles all lived in the same area. We could actually walk and see them. Indeed, on every Friday or Saturday or Sunday, we would be seeing them. And indeed, when Mom and I got married, and we lived in New York, in Queens at that time, we were required to see either Mom's parents or my parents during the weekend. So one of the reasons why we moved to Columbia, Maryland, was in part to get into a situation where we befriended multicultural communities, people with different ethnicities. And that's why we wanted you to, the children, to live in a different type of a neighborhood where there was less violence and less competition and more culturally diversified area. So that's a little story about my life in Brooklyn. And one of the values I want to share related to that is it's important for you to understand no matter where you live or what your circumstances are, what you do with those circumstances is really the difference. I mean, if I wanted to, I could claim I had a very difficult life as a child. wouldn't be true, but I could make that claim. I could say that, my parents were not born in this country. My father was born outside of Minsk, and my mother was born in Czechoslovakia. We were impoverished and lived in poor neighborhoods, but that's not the story I want to tell. And that isn't the story at all. The story is of a child who lived in Brooklyn and loved life. There were some dangers, but I appreciate all the things that my parents gave. And the point is, I was not going to be limited by whatever experiences I had. I would only use those experiences as rich events that helped shape my life and enabled me to do other things. Which gets to the next question, which is, why did you become a teacher? Now that is an interesting question. You already know that my parents were not born in this country, and you all know that I was obviously born in Brooklyn. Okay? But my parents didn't know that much about American life, and they couldn't give me a lot of information about what I should do with my life. But at age 10, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. And that was, I want to become a teacher. I wanted to be able to teach others. I wanted to be able to share information. I wanted to help others. I wanted to empower others. But why did I want to become a teacher? Friends, family, I wanted to become a teacher because of Mr. Norman Kraft. Mr. Norman Kraft, who I love to this day, unfortunately he's no longer alive, he was my 5th grade teacher. And not only did he teach me the subjects that you learn in 5th grade, this, by the way, was at PS 221 in Crown Heights, but he also ran the after-school center. In other words, he played ball with me. Basketball, stickball, punchball, softball, handball, slapball. One day after school, I asked Mr. Kraft, "Can I ask you a personal question?" He said, "Sure." Richie, which is what I was called then. I said, "I know you get paid as a teacher at PS 221, but do you also get paid as a playground director?" He said, "Yes, I do." I said, "You mean you get paid to play ball with me?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Fantastic. Now I'm going to tell my parents what I want to be when I grow up. I want to become a teacher who also plays ball with children after school." And I told my parents that, and I came home at night and I told them, and I remember my father saying to me, "But how do you do that?" I said, "Well, Dad, how do you do that?" He says, "I don't know. Go and ask Mr. Kraft." As you probably know, I'm one of the first kids in my family to ever graduate from college. So I went back to Mr. Kraft and I said to him, "How do I become a teacher?" And he said, "You become a teacher by going to college." And I said, "What's that?" He said, "Oh, well, there's elementary school, and there's high school, and then there's college." I said, "Okay, great. And how do you get to college?" He said, "You have to do well in school, and then you get to college, you may even get a scholarship," which is what I got. But that's another story. So I went back and I told my parents that I want to become a teacher at age 10, and I want to play ball with kids, and that's how I became a teacher. But there's an interesting story behind this. And that is, when I wrote the first book, I dedicated that book to my father and mother, to Elaine and her parents, and also Mr. Kraft, because he was the one who inspired me to become a teacher. So after I wrote the book, I went back to PS 221 to find Mr. Kraft, and he wasn't there. And I asked the folks, "What am I supposed to do?" They said, "Go down to 110 Livingston Street and find out where he is," which is where the Board of Education was. So I went down to 110 Livingston Street, and they said that they didn't have the information for me. So I decided to go and check the, I guess it was called the white pages, the telephone book. And I called up all the Norman Crafts in Brooklyn. I couldn't find him. So I figured I'll never get to see Norman Craft or talk to him and thank him for what he's done. So check this out. In 1993, which is around 50 years after I was born and 40 years after I had Mr. Craft as my teacher, I'm playing in a three-wall regional handball tournament in the singles division, and I'm playing a fellow named Stephen Craft. I won that game and I won the tournament, but that's not the point. The point is, after the game, I asked Steve if he knows Norman Craft, because I've been looking for him for 40 years. And he said, of course I know Mr. Craft. I said, no, wait a second. He must be around 80 years old now. He was short. He taught at PS 221. He said, yes, I know him. Of course I know him. He's my father. I said, your father? Where does he live? He said, he lives in Queens. I said, ay, Queens. I checked Brooklyn. I checked the wrong borough. So to make a long story short, actually this is a long story, but to make it short, I give him a book that I dedicated in part to him. I gave it to Stephen. I asked him to please share the book with his father, and I wrote a little message saying, you are the second hero of my life. My first hero was my dad. You're my second hero, and thank you so much for getting me into teaching. 3 nights later, I get a telephone call around 8 o'clock, and Mr. Craft is on the phone and said, Richard Solomon? I said, yes, who is this? He said, this is Mr. Norman Craft. I said, Mr. Norman Craft, I'm so thrilled to hear your voice. You had such a tremendous impact upon me. Thank you so much for calling me. He said, you think it's good for you? It's exciting for you? He said, I think I'm in heaven. I taught you 40 years ago, and you became a teacher? And not only did you become a teacher, but you wrote books on teaching, and you became a college professor, and you're teaching others? This is magnificent. I have to see you. Do you ever come into New York? I said, yes, I do. He said, the next time you come into New York, you're going to visit me and sleep and stay at my house, and we'll share old times. I said, Mr. Craft, let me just ask you one question. Do you remember me? And Mr. Craft said, no, I don't remember you. I said, you don't? He said, no, I taught thousands of children. I don't remember you. But you remembered me. Now, what's the point? What's the value of this story about Mr. Craft and going into teaching? Well, the first message I'd like to share with all of you is it's very important to have good role models in your life. And if you can't find them so easily, look around and find someone who's leading a quality life. I was so fortunate to have Dad as my role model and Mr. Craft as my role model. And secondly, the value I'd like to pass on is helping others. Tikkun olam, trying to repair the world, and being able to go and find meaning through the empowering others to fulfill their dreams. Because teachers are dream enablers. We as teachers enable others to fulfill their dreams. So thank you so much, family and friends, to listening to this demonstration or first installment of the Legacy Project. And I appreciate your willingness to listen to my stories. Thank you so much.